Okay, greetings everybody. So we are now going to continue with the second part of this book. This is the only book you had to procure for the course, God and the World's Arrangement, Matthew Dusty. Now, make sure you listen to his lecture. The author got Professor Dusty to kindly record for us 45-minute lecture, which is going to introduce Nyāya. I'm not going to do that. So if you haven't listened to his lecture, please listen to that now. I'm going to dive straight into the Nyāya Sutras, one of the other 6 schools that we've referred to. And now we're going to look at the Nyāya, the Vachaspati Mishra. There's 3 sutras in the text which speak of Īśvara. And you need to have this book because I can't put it up on the screen because it's illegal, because it's a new book and there's copyright. You know, I could Xerox a couple of pages, but we've been reading the whole book. So that's why it's not going up on the screen. You're going to have to look at me. So we have the 3 sutras on page 42. And by the way, his lecture was 45 minutes. So technically we should have 2 hours and 40 minutes every week. So I might need more than 1 hour and 20 minutes to cover what I need to cover here. And if it gets too much, I might do it in 2 sections. But it will all be for the same week. Okay, so you got Dusty's lecture and whatever I do now, whether that's in 1 session, 2-hour session, whether I break it up into 2. That'll be this week. And it's going to be a bit hard work because Nyāya are the logicians, the rationalists. So they're using, they're using critical reasoning and analysis and engaging in sort of, in deep level analysis of the issue, in this case, the issue of Īśvara. So it's going to be a bit of hard work. But let me say this, the rest of the reading for the rest of the semester, if you've been having a bit of a hard time with the Buddhist arguments, the Mimamsa arguments, the Sankhya, if you found those a little bit daunting, the rest is easy sailing after this. We read the Yoga Sutras, very user-friendly, and the Gita, very user-friendly. So the rest of the course, please don't feel intimidated. Don't feel, oh my God, we got another month of this. It'll be easy for you, okay? So the 3, go to page 42. 3 sutras in the Nyāya Sutras. There's only 3. They're in the 4th chapter, section 1, 19. The Lord is the cause, since we find that human action is ineffective. Next verse, 20. No, that's wrong. In the absence of human action, effects would not arise. 21. That too is not a good reason, since it is all actuated by the Lord. Now, most commentators, that could be read in different ways. That's how a sutra is. It could be read in different ways. But most commentators take the first 2 as the Purva-paksha, opposing points of view. And then 21 as the Nyāya position. So what's the 2 Purva-pakshas? 19. The Lord is the cause. God does everything. There's we don't have no agency. We're like machines. That God is responsible for everything, and we're just sort of and the reason is we find that human action is ineffective. We try to do things and we fail, so that means we don't have any power. So that means all the agencies and the Lord, when he decides, we're successful. When he decides otherwise, we fail. So that's the first opposing point of view. The second is, no, that's wrong. The second is still an opposing point of view, but this opposing point of view is rejecting the first opposing point of view. No, that's wrong. In the absence of human action, effects would not arise. So this is usually taken to mean if there was no human endeavor, an agency and free will, right? It means the same thing. What we call free will in theology, in philosophy, we call agency. So the first person says, oh God, we have no agency, no free will. Second person, no, forget about God. It's all human agency. If we don't try, nothing happens. And then the 21 is the Siddhanta, is the Nyāya point of view. No, that too is not a good reason, since it is all actuated by the Lord. And that's taken to mean that we have free will, we act, but then the results, we're free to act. Not that God's making us do this or the other. We have free will, but God then connects the results to our actions. Whatever our actions is, that's in our control. But whatever it is, then karma kicks in, and someone has to oversee karma. Karma meaning that I act and I get the appropriate fruit. So that would be the Nyāya position. So that's all there is in the actual Nyāya Sutras themselves. So now we go to page 46 and we get Vachaspati, right? Dusty's introduced him. He's also mentioned in the introduction here, and so he's about 10th century, 960. His date is 44, and he's responding to two powerful Buddhist logicians that we've kind of bumped into a little bit in our Buddhist section. Dignaga. When we think of Buddhist logic, the two names that really stand out are Dignaga, 480 to 540 CE. That's on page 45 of the Common Era. So let's say 6th century, 5th to 6th century. And then we have Kumarila, a few years later, very much in the 6th century. So right there before Vachaspati, and they're raising their non-theistic, anti-theistic arguments. Okay, so keep that in mind. Nyāya Sutra is very early. I don't know what date he gives it, but probably I'm going to guess. Well, he's got 100 CE. That's on page 41. And the Nyāya Sutra is written by Gautama. Okay, we're familiar now with Vedanta Sutra, and then we have the commentary of Shankara. So Nyāya Sutra, and then we have a commentary. And Vachaspati is not the first commentator. There's Udayana and Udyotkara, and they all of these names are on page 43. Vatsyayana is the first commentator. You don't need to know any of that, but if you're interested in a little bit of historical background, you can read pages 42, 43, and I think Professor Dusty has discussed that. Okay, so what's the point of all that is that Vachaspati in the 10th century is aware of these Buddhist challenges, Dignaga, Dharmakirti, 5th, 6th century. So he's got them in mind and he's responding to them. Okay, so we start off, page 46, in the middle. And this is his commentary on Nyāya Sutra 4.1.21, the third of the three sutras that we started with. So he starts off, so far we have unpacked the teachings of our revered teachers. Up to now, we've just sort of explained, we've just sort of elaborated on what our great revered teachers have said. But a doubt remains, there's still an issue left. What's that? There are three kinds of things in the universe. Okay, he's going to categorize things in three ways. Number one, those which are known to have an intelligent maker. Remember, the whole of this argument is going to be about whether there is an intelligent cause behind the universe, an intelligent being. That's what he's going to defend in various ways. Keep your eye on the ball. These are arguments for Īśvara as creator, okay, responding to the Buddhist arguments, which, you've had some sense of, right? Change, remember all of that? If there was an Īśvara, then he would change because he would be pre-creation Īśvara, then post-creation Īśvara, and then, if he thinks of creation, all these involves changes. And therefore, it can't be eternal because change is contrary to the notion of eternality. And other arguments, but that's one of the main ones. So he goes, look, and remember, Nyāya is going to say there has to be intelligence. If there's a product, there has to be a producer. Anything that's put together, someone has to put it together. A product means when something made of parts, those parts are put together, right? If you want to call them atoms, the atoms come together and they form this universe. Nyāya would say, fine, it's all very well saying there's atoms and they put together, but someone has to put them together. It can't just be random, molecular interaction. Well, a materialist would say that, okay? But not a theist. So his argument's going to be based wherever we see a product in our world that we know, we always find a maker. And so therefore, and then from that principle, that everything we see that's produced, remember how you make an inference? Wherever there's smoke, there's fire. Everywhere there's smoke, there's always fire. So that's how you make an inference that there's fire, even if you don't see fire. So wherever we see products, they have a producer. And therefore the same holds true for the universe and product and its ingredients such as trees and mountains and planets. These are all products, they're produced, they come together. There must be someone doing that. That's the argument he's going to be defending. Nowadays we call it intelligent design. So starts off, second line of page 46. There are three kinds of things in the universe. If you wanted to think about it this way, you can think of the universe in three different sorts of ways from the point of view of his argument. Number one, A, those known to have an intelligent maker, such as palaces, watchtowers, gates, and arches. These are products, and we know that they had a producer. B, those known not to have an intelligent maker, such as atoms and ether. Now, Nyāya, unlike Vedanta, Vedanta would say Brahman, Janmadya Syayataha, the creation with its atoms comes from Brahman. Nyāya doesn't say that. It accepts Īśvara, but it doesn't say Īśvara, that atoms and the forces and all the ingredients of the universe are manifest from Īśvara. No, they coexist. They're eternal. So atoms are eternal. They didn't have a maker. And Īśvara is eternal. And various other things are eternal, various categories of reality. Nowadays, we would say forces and gravity. They would say substances and motions. Motion would be gravity. And they add other things as well, inherence and things we don't need to worry about. They're eternal. Okay, so like Vedanta and Nyāya accept Īśvara as a cause. Pay attention here. Vedanta says Īśvara is efficient and material cause. Material cause means Īśvara, he's the cause of the matter of the universe. He's the material cause, and he's the efficient. He then gets the matter and he arranges it into creation. Nyāya said he's not the material cause, he is the efficient cause. So they share the idea that someone has to put it all together. Difference is, Nyāya would say, but matter, God doesn't create matter, it coexists eternally with him. Vedanta would say that in some form or fashion, matter is a power, a Shakti, or some kind of an emanation from God. So God is both material, matter comes from God, and the efficient, and he arranges it, puts it together. Nyāya, not material, only efficient. But other than that, they're both theists. So they share one theistic premise, and they disagree on another important theistic premise. So from Nyāya point of view, the atoms, in B now, we're reading B, there are ingredients known not to have an intelligent maker. Atoms don't have an intelligent maker because they're eternal, so they have no maker. And C, those for which having an intelligent maker is in doubt. And that's what they're going to talk about now, the one that's in doubt. Right? You don't have to theorize about things you know. Right? Two things you know. Certain things you know have producers. Buddhists, everybody accepts a palace, a tower has an intelligent designer. No debate about that. Who's going to disagree with that? Buddhists not going to disagree with that. That's A. B. Certain things that are known not to have a maker. Actually, Buddhists would agree that the material ingredients are eternal. Vedanta wouldn't agree, but he's arguing against Buddhists now. So they would agree. There are things that you and I, you the Buddhists, and we the Nyāyikas, we agree that certain things have no maker, atoms. Then there's this third category, which is where the Buddhists and Nyāya disagree. And what's that? There are those for which having an intelligent maker is in doubt. And what are those? Such as bodies, trees, earth, and mountains. We don't see the producer of a mountain. We don't see it being made by a producer. Why? Either because it is something that is yet to be known, but we haven't discovered the maker, or because it is disputed. In this case, it's disputed. Buddhists say there's no maker. We don't need a maker. Matter is eternal. And when I say we, it's going to be the Nyāyika. I'm wearing my Nyāya hat now. Or it's because it's disputed and no knowledge source that would settle the matter has been identified. We haven't agreed upon a knowledge source that would settle our disagreement. And nor any defeater that would rule out a possible view. You haven't defeated us, we haven't defeated you. A defeater means an argument that wins the debate. So that's a defeater. And it is false that mere non-perception is enough to refute the thesis of the Lord existence, as there may be existing things that by nature are imperceptible, like atoms. And he says, and we can't say, because we can't see the maker, it doesn't exist, because there's lots of things we can't see. We can't see things like atoms, but we know they exist. And Buddhists and the Buddhists and the Nyāyika agree that there are things that we can't see that exists. Okay, so we can't. So in other words, he's saying non-perception. You can't bring that into the argument. We both agree that the fact that you don't perceive something doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't exist. So now he's going to lay out his argument. This is a syllogism, a structured argument that Professor Dusty was talking about. Number one. Now he's going to talk about the thing under dispute, not A, not B. A, we know that everybody agrees certain things are created. B, we both agree, maybe Vedanta doesn't, but he's talking to Nyāya, Buddhists. We both agree that there are things that have no creator, like matter itself. But C, there's this category that's disputed. We can't see the creator. We say there is one, you say there's not. So that's the one he's going to follow up on. Now, and what is C? Things that are the subject of dispute. He's just repeating C, like bodies, trees, mountains, and the ocean. Now he's going to stress his position. They have a maker. We're going to argue that. On what grounds? Who is knowledgeable about the material causes? If you make something, you have to know what the ingredients are. If I make a microphone, I have to know, what the legs and I have to know what the ingredients are that I put together for the microphone. So you have to be the creator, but you have to be knowledgeable. To create means you're knowledgeable about the material causes. So that's number one. That's his argument. There is a maker. Now, why? Why does he say that? C. Number two, because they are produced. Alternately, two reasons it's going to give. One, because they're produced. Second reason, their material causes are insentient, right? The material ingredients of a tree in a mountain, they're insentient, so they can't make themselves. They have no consciousness, no intelligence. So they're inanimate. So an inanimate thing can't make itself. It's just inanimate, it has no intelligence or consciousness or will, right? Third member of the syllogism. Whatever is produced, wherever there's smoke, there's fire. Whatever is produced, number one, the two reasons. And whatever has a material cause that is sentient, then you give your example, like a palace, has a maker who is knowledgeable about the material cause. So two things, production, anything produced has a maker. And if the causes, the ingredients of that thing are insentient, then that's the second reason. 4, things that are the subject of dispute, we're disputing what? We're not disputing A or B, but C, what is that? Bodies, trees, mountains, and the ocean are produced, and they have insentient material causes. My body's insentient. Consciousness animates it, but the body itself is insentient. So therefore, they too have a maker who is knowledgeable about the material causes. That's the syllogism. That's his argument. And he's offering this now as a first round, like a round in debate. They had different, you gave your argument, then the opponents point, if there's any defects, the opponent will point out, oh, but this is inadequate, or this is a defeater, or this is controversial, this has not been established, you can't use it. Gives reasons. You then get a chance to respond to that. And if you can, and then there's no further criticisms, then your point of view emerges successfully. If you can't respond to the criticism, then the opponent has won. So there's all kinds of rules. There's like 10 different steps of how a debate takes place, and they were refereed. Probably in royal courts, the kings would orchestrate debates amongst the pundits and so forth. Okay. Now, the first prover. So he's going to say there's a maker, and he's offering two proofs. What's the first one? The first prover given here, being produced, is not unestablished, meaning that we have grounds to say it. We have established grounds. Why? Since the things in question are composite. Anything that's composite, composed of parts that are put together, that's a composite, they're produced. Also, they have intermediate size. Anything that is intermediate size, it consists of components. They're not all pervasive like ether. Ether is all pervasive, so it has no parts because it's infinite. And nor they're infinitesimal. If something's infinitesimal, it has no parts because it's too small. So things which are infinite or infinitesimal, they might have no parts, but everything in between, right, is composite. So therefore, the argument holds that anything that's composite, that's his argument. Composite means a product, produced, things put together, has a maker. And they can also be moved. If something's infinitesimal, we can't move it because it's everywhere already. But they can be moved, as in the case of pieces of clothing. So he gives the example of clothing, which are made of parts, threads that are spun together, and you make a cloth. And he keeps on with the argument. Furthermore, it would be wrong to hold that this inference is trying to prove what is already admitted. The Buddhists will say, yeah, we accept that there's consciousness behind creation, but we don't accept there's an Īśvara, like Mimamsa. Remember Mimamsa? We accept there's consciousness, but it's the souls that are the conscious entities that trigger creation. We don't need to posit a big soul, an Īśvara kind of soul, a big God with a big G. So therefore, the Buddhists will say, we've already proved that. We don't have an argument here. We accept there's consciousness and intelligence, right? But the Buddhist wants that to be the little flow of consciousness. So he's saying it's wrong to hold that this inference is trying to prove what is already admitted, but it's already admit. Consciousness is central to creation. Because Buddhists accept the individual's volition influences the formation of things like the earth. And the Mimamsas, as we know, accept that conscious selves do the same, right? Buddhists, and they have a different notion of consciousness. The Buddhists is momentary and interdependent flow, and the Mimamsas, it's a substance, an eternal substance. So they differ in what that consciousness is metaphysically and ontologically, but they both agree on this one thing. You don't need to have a God. Let that consciousness itself, whether it's eternal or momentary, bracket that for now, but let consciousness itself be the trigger. Well, both these opponents do indeed believe there's consciousness, as Vachaspati. What we need, not that kind of little consciousness, what we need to account for creation is conscious agency coupled with direct awareness of material causes such as earth atoms and the like. The little souls don't know the atoms. They can't even see the atoms. They're too tiny. They don't know all the ingredients in creation. I mean, I might know the ingredients of something simple like how to make a table. But so to be a producer, you have to know all the ingredients of your product. Only God can know that. You need to have someone with that level of awareness that knows all the material causes. The little souls are not adequate for that. They only have minute awareness and can produce little things like pots and maybe palaces. Okay, so that's his argument. Conversely, okay, so he's saying you need someone who had direct awareness of all the material causes, including the smallest atoms, or we would say particles, subatomic particles. Conversely, if they do in fact admit that there is direct awareness of the material causes, if they accept that there is an awareness that knows all the material causes, well, then they've accepted what we accept, that there's a God then. Maybe call it something else, call it Amagama, but we agree, there's a supreme intelligence. If they do admit that there is direct awareness of the material causes, then they admit that there's an Īśvara. May this, maybe it gets sarcastic. May this indeed be a case of proving what is admitted. You're proving what's already admitted. We say there is an Īśvara. If you say there's a cosmic intelligence, you're agreeing with us. So you're then proving what's already, he's being sarcastic, admitted. Who would not want his own view to be established so easily? Sarcasm. Thank you very much. If you take the second view, and you take the first view, that consciousness, small consciousness produces creation, and that's not adequate because small consciousness doesn't know all the ingredients of creation. Might know some tiny little area of knowledge, but not all of it. We need someone who knows it all. That's why we say it's going to be omniscient, because he knows everything. Omni, all. So omniscient, knows all. Right, moving along across the page. 48. For the same reason, our proof, if we give proof that, for example, like the potter, so we say all products have a creator, and then you have to give an example of that in Indian logic. You make a statement and you give an example. You make a statement about something that is unseen, right? Wherever there's smoke, there's fire. Then you give an example, like the kitchen fire in the village. Ladies make chapatis on cow dung. So just like that causes smoke. So, so that's the example. So for the same reason, our proof does not commit the fallacy of contradiction. The fallacy of contradiction would be committed here, that in other words, the contradiction would mean your example contradicts your premise. The fallacy of contradiction, so in other words, I say wherever there is smoke, there is fire, like the mist on the lake. Lots of contradiction. That doesn't prove fire. That just mist has nothing to do with smoke. So the fallacy of contradiction would be committed here only if pots, cloths, and the like did not have agents as causes. Agents directly aware of the material causes. Saying, okay, now next thing. Next objection. Okay, maybe the Buddhists. But there is a contradiction. Okay, remember this is the opposing point of view, where it says objection, opposing point of view. And then Vachaspati responds. Because knowledge sources militate against a specific implication within your proof. Okay, as a creator, the Lord would have to be embodied. The opponent says, okay, let's go along with all that. You want to say wherever there's a product, there's a producer, but and you say like the potter, like the person who makes the palace, the person who makes a watchtower, the potter who makes the pot. But in these instances, they all have bodies. To make something, you have to have senses and instruments of action. You have to have hands, and you have the eyes to see what you're doing. So you have to have a body to make anything. So if you want to go with that argument that all products have a producer, then you have to take the corollary of that, which is that all producers have bodies that we know of in our experience. Skip the next sentence, go down 5 lines. Right at the end of the line 6 from the top of that paragraph. Similarly, in your inference to God, God's knowledge is said to grasp material causes. You say the producer has to know the material causes, then he must have senses to know them. He must be able to see them and touch them and contact them in order to put them together for creation. He must have a body of some sort. So in God's knowledge is said to grasp material causes of the world like earthly atoms. You're saying that, the opponent is saying to Nyāya. But like every other instance of knowledge that we are aware of, all knowledge that we're aware of, such knowledge would have to be produced by a collection of causes. You need a body, you need instruments, you make your pots, you need a body, you need a stick, you need a wheel to turn the clay on. You need instruments, starting with your own instruments of your body. So such knowledge would have to be produced by a collection of causes that include a knowing self. So fine, if there's a knowing self, it still has to have a body, which is tethered, stuck with an inner faculty of mind. Then God must have a body to touch atoms and move atoms and create, and he must have a mind, which is, remember, is separate from the Atman. In the absence of any, and he has a body, must have a body. In the absence of any of these, knowledge could not arise. So you make an inference of something you know, and then you use that as an example for something you don't know that's similar to it. So all things that we know are produced, have a producer. Well, then creation is a product, it too must have a producer. So the opponent says, well, all things that we know that are produced is produced by a producer with a body and a mind. That's the argument. Therefore, your argument is to be rejected. How can God have a body? And remember the old arguments, if he has a body, how can he have a body before creation? Matter's not been created yet. So what's his body made of? The ingredients of his body haven't been created. You're going to say that some other God made his body, then that other God must have a body too. Well, and who gave that other God the body? And then you end up in an infinite regress, another God, another God. Remember the argument? The Vaishnavas would say that fails because God's body is not material. But we're not going to engage that argument here. Here, the assumption is if there is a body, it must be material. They never seem to engage the possibility that a body could be non-material, which is actually what the Vaishnava traditions and some other theistic traditions say. Maybe we'll touch on that when we get to the end of the course. We'll read the stories of Krishna. Krishna comes not in a material body. It's a body made of Brahman. Therefore, your arguments to be rejected. Furthermore, our counter contention is well established and not defeated by any consideration you have advanced. Our position is there's no Īśvara and you haven't defeated that yet. If the collection of causal factors, the body, the senses, the mind, including a body, were not in place, they really want to focus on the body, then there wouldn't be any knowledge. To have knowledge, you have to have a body. So God would have to have a body. See the point? Where does that body come from? Who made that body? It hasn't created yet. Okay, I know I'm repeating myself, but sometimes repetition is good. Right. Vachaspati. But it's a bit complicated. You are wrong. If X does not entail Y, then the absence of Y does not entail the absence of X. So if consciousness does not entail a body, then the absence of a body does not entail the absence of a consciousness. We say God has no body, but that doesn't mean that if there's no body, there's no God. Don't worry about it. That's his X and Y business. But let's go to the top of the page. We don't want to get caught up in that. Verse 49. Here's what he wants to say. Furthermore, however many non-eternal instances of knowledge I identified, they would not rule out the possibility of eternal knowledge. So he's saying all of the producers that we know, those who make pots, those who make palaces, their knowledge is not eternal and it's limited. But that doesn't mean there isn't unlimited and eternal knowledge. And he gives an example. For clouds, which are composed of water vapors, they're not eternal. They dissipate. As the color that inheres in clouds, that's not eternal. But this doesn't entail that the cause of clouds, which are water atoms, along with their inherent color, are not eternal also. We can say the cloud is not eternal and its color is not eternal, but that doesn't mean that the atoms inside the cloud are not eternal. Just because one thing isn't eternal, it doesn't mean that something within it may not be eternal. Okay, so God, so the argument is God is eternal. Both of our sides accept that something that exists without being caused is eternal. We all agree that if something's not caused, if it has a cause, it's not eternal because it comes into being when it's caused. But if something is eternal, it has no cause. So we both agree on that, he says. It is wrong to hold that since we find here and there in the world, we find here and there with the potters and palace makers, that knowledge is accompanied by things like a body. It's true. We see in this world, potters have bodies, palace makers have bodies. So that's fair enough, he says, but just because that's the case, we shouldn't conclude that every instance of knowledge entails the knowers having a body. There might be knowers, producers who don't have a body. Just because all the ones we know have doesn't mean there can't be God who doesn't have a body. So he's saying, for entailment is an essential relationship. Entailment means vyapti, wherever there's smoke, there's fire. Don't worry about that. It requires the absence of additional conditions. In other words, if you say smoke comes from fire, there's no additional conditions. Wherever there's smoke, there's always, always, always fire. The reverse is not the case. Wherever there's fire, there's not always smoke. You could have a dry fire. So wherever, but if it's an added condition, if the wood is wet, then there's smoke. If you want to say we can say wherever there's smoke, there's fire. No one can challenge that. But if we flip it around, wherever there's fire, there's smoke. No, it's only if the fire is wet wood, there's a condition, then there's smoke. Very dry wood, no smoke. That's his argument. So how is that relevant? For knowledge that is produced, if it's a produced knowledge, then you need a body and instruments. But knowledge that is produced does depend upon peculiar causes, such as the subjects having a body. If you produce the knowledge, well, then it has a cause, then you need a body for that knowledge. But what if knowledge is eternal? God has eternal knowledge. It's not produced. So that kind of knowledge doesn't need a body. That's his argument. But something eternal does not depend on causes like that, like bodies and instruments. You can decide if you think that's a good argument, right? If the knowledge is produced, like I suddenly see this microphone, I didn't see it before, there it is. So now I've created a knowledge episode in my mind of the microphone. To produce knowledge, you need instruments. But if knowledge is eternal, it's always there. It doesn't need anything because it's eternal. See the point? If something's eternal, it doesn't need any accessories to activate it because it's always there by definition of eternality. So God's knowledge is eternal. He doesn't need instruments. That's his argument. Last sentence. Eternal knowledge is not refuted by repeated experiences of correlation between produced knowledge and having a body. All of our repeated instances, the things we see in this world, the potter making a pot, palace maker making a palace. You can repeat that, right? The plate maker making a plate, the shoe maker making a shoe. Go on forever. The factory worker working in a factory. All of those instances, it's true that you need a body because those knowledges are produced, right? Knowledge of the pot is produced. But if the knowledge is eternal, you want to make a pot, you need instruments because it's a product. It wasn't there at one moment, and then you make it happen the next. You produce it. For that, you need instruments. But if knowledge is eternal, it doesn't need instruments because it's already there. That's the argument. Take it or leave it. Moving on to page 50. Objection. Here. And I think this was in Professor Dusty's talk. Maybe, says the opponent, now the opponent again, objection, but your argument establishes only the property being produced entails having a maker knowledgeable about the material causes. as seen in examples like pots, but nothing more than this. You may establish this much only for things like earth. Where do you get the distinct property having a maker with eternal knowledge that grasps all things? It's not found in examples of things produced as pots. He's saying, okay, let's go with all of that. So all of the examples you give, the pot and the pot maker, let's forget about the body for now. Let's forget that argument. But all these people, the palace maker, the pot maker, the shoemaker, their knowledge is limited. So you want to say that, okay, there's a maker of the creation. Let's go with that. Why do they make this huge jump that creator of the universe is omniscient? Your examples are not omniscient. The pot is not omniscient. Shoemaker is not omniscient. Palace maker is not omniscient. Okay, they're producers of products. You want to say the earth is a product, and you want to say it has a producer. If we go along with that, fine. But why do they make this jump that producer has to be omniscient? Vachaspati. Let's go skip us. We have to skip some, and I don't want to get through the really dense bits because I don't want to bore you. So to go to the second paragraph in the middle, the same holds here, right? We skip that bit. Go to the end. If the maker's knowledge were not eternal, uncreated, and did not range over all things, there could not be what there is, in fact. The simultaneous production of effects through immeasurable and unlimited space at every place and location, effects perceptible and imperceptible in animals and plants, and the organic world as a whole, and so on. He's saying, if he wasn't omniscient, remember, we're saying that the creator, that means he's created everything from the beginning of time. So he knows everything from the beginning of time, and he has to know every single thing in creation. So omni, he must know everything. So the potter, he only knows how to make a pot. Palace maker knows a bit more. Palace is more complicated, right? He knows how to put doors and windows and turrets, and so his knowledge is expanding because his product is a bigger, more complicated thing. So keep going with that then. If we're talking about the universe from the beginning of time, we're saying that sort of a creator, he must know everything. So that's why we say he's omniscient, right? The nature of the inferred, that there's, the intelligence behind the universe, if there is a producer, that requires additional qualities such as knowing everything. And so that would be eternal knowledge. Okay? And last paragraph. And such knowledge belonging to the Supreme Lord couldn't be produced by things that are themselves effects. What can produce it? This knowledge. Bodies they're effects. They're part of what is created. So they can't be involved in the pre-creation require ingredients of the creator. They themselves are effects, senses and bodies, right? Such knowledge belonging to the Supreme couldn't be produced by things that are themselves effects, such as created bodies and sense faculties like our own. We would have to conjure up yet another Lord to produce such a body that is capable of generating the knowledge in question. If you say God has to have a body, well, and he hasn't created yet, so there's no matter to make his body, then we'd have to say there's another God that gave him a body. And then Vachaspati is agreeing with that argument. Actually, that's an argument that is brought against Īśvara. He says, yeah, we agree with that. If he did have a body, then who created that body? Another God, the super God. Well, how did that God do it if he didn't have a body? So he would need to have a body. So then you need a super God, and back to a super, and all the way at infinity. Regressus ad infinitum, depending on which side of the pond you're on. And this would entail an unavoidable difficulty if you say that God's body was made by another super God, since before that second God, we would need yet another to create his body, in what I just said. And you need a super God. Ad infinitum or infinitum. It is better to propose a single imperceptible being rather than going through that, says Vachaspati. It's so complicated, much simpler. Just say there's a single imperceptible being, he's invisible, with eternal knowledge and nobody. It's better to say that than innumerable imperceptible beings, that God, he had his God who made him, and he had another God. So innumerable, because there's a regression ad infinitum. So then the opponent, from this consideration alone, the proposal that there is an eternal body or eternal senses is rebutted. Nyāya rejects the idea of God having an eternal body. By this reasoning, the following objection is set aside. So we reject that idea. God doesn't need a body. He just has eternal knowledge, and that eternal knowledge is sufficient. Okay. It may be that anything that has organized structure. Okay, now another argument. Opponent says, okay, fine. Fine. It may be that anything that has organized structure, product, it's organized, the things come together, this is organized. It may be, and then the universe also organized, it's not just chaotic, matter, like Big Bang. Something makes it come together into the universe. So it may be that anything that has organized structure has some kind of intelligent cause. Opponent says, okay, let's agree, let's give you that. But how can then a single cause be proved? How do you know there's just one cause? Let's say there is a God. He doesn't need a body. Fine. How do you know it's just one? What if there's two or a million? Vachaspati says, one who wishes to refute the omniscience of the Maker could do so if fleshy eyes had the power to perceive atoms as well as witnessing selves along with their karma. So Vachaspati says, what we're looking for is an intelligence that can see atoms. Fleshy eyes can't. So anyone with a body is not qualified. Okay. Your eyes cannot see atoms, right? Physicists agree with that. We see the trail they leave in a vacuum, right? You'd have to have the eyes to not only see the atoms, we'd also have to see the Atmans, and you'd also have to see the karma. Because in Nyāya, Īśvara's very important role, in addition to really what Īśvara is doing is supervising karma. It's because of karma that Īśvara brings the atoms together to form my body because of my karma, your bodies because of your karma, the tree's body behind me because of the tree's karma. So really it's about karma. There needs to be an Īśvara to oversee karma. Karma is central because creation is nothing other than a product to accommodate karma of the souls. That's actually what creation is. It's not that there's creation and then the souls come along. No, there are souls with karma, and as a result of that karma, then matter surrounds each soul in a particular body and creates external arrangements, all because the souls need to experience those external arrangements in accordance with karma. It's really karma that is the major that needs an overseer, because the creation is nothing other than, like I have my individual karma, but all of us together, trillions and trillions and trillions of souls with our individual karmas, that requires an overseer, puts it all together, and that's what the universe is. It's an arrangement such that everybody's karma can be experienced by each individual soul. So then Vachaspati continues, but there's no fleshy eyes. You can't see karma. You can't see souls with your fleshy eyes. Therefore, you would have to postulate many beings capable of perceiving such supersensuous, sensible things, who would be very different from us in our kind. It's better for the sake of simplicity to posit one such being. He's saying, okay, if you want to say there's lots of beings, first of all, you have to say they're different from us. They would also have to be beings that can see atoms. Right? The opponent says, why do you just say there's one God? What if there's more than one? Any number of gods. Vachaspati said, well, the requirement is the same. Even if there's lots of them, they still have to be able to see the karma, see the souls, see the atoms, to put it all together. Why bother saying there's many? It's simpler. Occam's razor in philosophy. The simplest solution is the better one. So he just gives us an Occam's razor. It's called lagutva in Sanskrit. It's lighter, it's easier. Rather than saying, it's easy to say there's one rather than many. It's unnecessary to say there are many, because either way, you're going to have to say they're super normal. Even if you say they're many, you're still going to have to say that they're super, that they're not the regular souls. Buddhists want to say they're the regular souls that trigger creation. Mimamsa wants to say regular souls. Vachaspati says, well, if you agree with our argument that whoever creates has to know the ingredients of creation, right? I make a microphone, I have to know where the legs are, where the wire is, how to wire it up, I have to know the ingredients. So if you say, so therefore, if you accept that argument, then you say, yes, whoever makes creation has to know atoms. Well, it's not going to be a regular souls then. And if that's not an option, you have to say it's a super normal person, but why have a bunch of them? It's easy to say one. What have you gained by saying there's a bunch of super normal beings who can see souls and karma and atoms? Just say there's one. So that's the argument. Page 52. And we've got 8 more pages, and we have a bit longer, 2 hours, but I have no idea. Where's the clock on this thing? Oh, 40. Oh, we got plenty of time, 45 minutes. We'll do it, my friends. So then next class we move on. And I hope you enjoy this, but follow it. Remember, philosophy is meant to train our minds, my friends, to think critically and carefully. So a degree in philosophy, even if you don't become a philosophy professor, law schools, they love people with philosophy degrees because they know they can think critically. So if you follow these arguments, force yourself. Don't give up and say, oh, I don't know that. We all get a bit Tamasic sometimes and think like that. But force yourself, and it's like training your body, right? Lift weights, your body gets strong. So you have to force yourself to do it. Body might not want to, but it's good for you. So the same with philosophy, my friends. It trains your mind. So try to follow along. And but as I say, next week it'll get lighter. The sort of, I think it'll be more user-friendly. Right. Now, objection. Back to the argument. We can explain the arising of effects, products, like bodies and earth, merely from the connection with the individual cells and atoms. We don't need a God. Back to this same old argument. Let the cells be the cause. Like the fruition of karma, when it matures, who needs a conscious agency? Who needs an Īśvara? Vachaspati, that should not be alleged. Don't try to say that, he says. The tie between being produced and having an agent who is directly conscious of the material causes is established naturally and free from additional conditions. Same argument. The souls are not up to the task because they don't know the material ingredients of creation. They can't see karma. They can't see the atoms. How can they therefore be the conscious agents of creation? They don't have that capability. What you need is maybe a soul. Īśvara is a kind of a soul, an Atman, but a supreme soul with eternal omniscient knowledge. You need that kind of a maker. Next objection. Your argument is beset by deviation, right? We have counter arguments. Deviation means we have counter arguments that disprove your arguments. Since we know that A, without supervision, the mind and senses produce cognition. We don't need an Īśvara. There's no supervision. Mind and senses produce knowledge by themselves, number one. And B, and without guidance, insentient milk flows of its own accord from old to young cow. We don't need an Īśvara. The milk just flows naturally when the calf comes to the mother cow. Others flow. C, and without conscious efforts, trees flourish in the forest. We don't see any Īśvara, they just grow. And Vachaspati says, no, you can't say that because that's the very thing that's under debate. You can't use that as a counter argument. Because we're saying those are in the category of things we're debating. We say that bodies and trees and flowing of milk is all the products of conscious agency. So that's wrong. You cannot use these cases as counter arguments as they are among the things that we are arguing about. You can't bring in the thing that you're arguing about. You can argue about it. You can't bring it in as a counter argument. Okay. And then the next one. You cannot simply rule out intelligence agency here because it isn't directly seen. You can't see, well, we see potters, we see palace makers, but we don't see God. So therefore, if it's not seen, we don't accept it. In the way we deny that a rabbit has a horn on its head, right? He's saying, look, if we'd say that there is no horn on the head of a rabbit, rabbits don't have horns. So we don't see it because it doesn't exist. He's saying it's not like that. You can't say we don't see Īśvara and it doesn't, and therefore it doesn't exist. Just like we don't see a horn on the head of a rabbit because it doesn't exist. Vachaspati says you can't say that. Why? Since the Lord is not fit to be apprehended by ordinary perception, because by definition, Īśvara cannot be seen by the eyes. But were there a horn, we are fit, the eyes are fit to see if a horn on the head of a rabbit were there a horn. See the difference? In the example of the non-existent horn on a rabbit, we say the horn doesn't exist, but had there been one, we could have seen it. But Īśvara a priori from the beginning is not perceived. So you could never use non-perception as an argument, because it's not the case that were he there, you could see him, because but the a priori definition of God, that he doesn't have a body and therefore he's not perceptible. We can only perceive things with the body. Okay, so that's the argument. And you can't bring in this horn on the rabbit argument, because that's different. Because had there been a horn, you could have seen it, but you can never see Īśvara right from the get-go, because Īśvara doesn't have a body or a form that you could see. But Nyāya. So since the Lord is not fit, meaning is not capable of being perceived in the first place, he's not fit to be apprehended by ordinary perception. Proof of non-perception does not apply here. Can't bring that in, that you can't see something. Sankhya would say, another school, Sankhya would say, in their argumentation, they would say, well, non-perception does not eliminate. There's lots of things we can't see, and they give a list of reasons why you can't see something. Maybe it's too far, you can't see it. Maybe it's blocked by a wall and you can't see it. Maybe it's too small and you can't see it. Maybe your senses are defective and you can't see it. Maybe it's too subtle, like air, to be seen. And they give a list of 5 or 6 reasons why something cannot be seen, but we know it's there. It's just that it's not perceptible, and there's conditions, and because of conditions that make it non-perceptible, but that doesn't deny its existence. So Sankhya says that, another school, but Vachaspati would probably agree with all of that. Īśvara, it's too subtle. It doesn't have a gross form. So how are you going to see it? You can only see things with gross forms, with shape and form and color. Something has no color. Even if it has a gross form, if it has no color, you wouldn't see it. Eyes can only see color. And anyway, further, if one held that non-perception of something that another person is trying to prove were enough to rebut the proof, then inference would be finished, would have no inference. We wouldn't have the method of inference. If you say that you can't see the thing, that's what inference is about, is identifying something that you can't see because of a sign of it. Like the smoke is the sign of the fire. You can't see the fire, but you know it's there because of smoke. If you deny the possibility of proving something that's imperceptible, then you don't have inference anymore. That's what inference is in Indian logic. You see something that is a sign of something else. Like physicists say, there's black matter, you can't see it, but why physicists say there's 90% of the universe is black matter. Why? Because we see certain effects that can only be explained by postulating the cause of them as being dark matter. You don't see it, but you infer it's there. So if you don't allow that, then you have no inference anymore. There's no more induction. That the whole process of science would be finished, and philosophy. All right. Of course, and the last line of 52, of course, we accept the evidence of non-perception regarding something like a rabbit's horn. Of course, we accept that in the case of the rabbit, it has no form, no horn, because the horn doesn't exist. Why? Since such a horn would in principle be perceptible. If there were a horn, you would in principle see it. That's not the case with Īśvara. Īśvara is in principle not perceivable because Īśvara has no body. Okay. So now the next objection. Maybe, but it is false that the simple fact of being produced naturally entails having an intelligent agent. He says, you can't just say all things that produce have an intelligent agent. Some maybe, but not all. Rather, it's only a certain kind of being produced, says the opponent. Not all things that are produced, certain things. Like what? When someone notices something whose creation she has not personally witnessed, she still knows that it was crafted if it is something like a pot. So, okay, you can't just say everything that's produced, only things that you know are produced. So I know a pot is produced, so I go to another town and I see a pot in the window and I know that was produced because it's like the one in my village. So that kind of thing, you can say, or even a plate. It's near enough to a pot, so you could say you didn't see it produced, but it's kind of like a pot. You can say, well, a plate was produced. That's fair enough, but you can't just jump from there to the whole universe. only those things which are like things that you have seen produced. If you see another example of that, even though you don't see it being produced, it's similar enough to what you have seen being produced. You could say that was produced too. That's the argument. When someone notices something whose creation she has not personally witnessed, she still knows that it was crafted or produced if it is something like a pot, whose existence or non-existence is known to conform to the existence or non-existence of an intelligent maker. But what I just said, a pot's made by a maker. You go to another town, you see a pot, you didn't see it being made, but that was it, because it's like the one you do know. And cloth and pots and plates are similar enough. But it does not hold for those things that have the unqualified property of being produced. You can't jump from that with no qualification from pots and cloths and plates and just make this massive, great big leap into create. Therefore, creation has a producer. That's the opponent. It doesn't hold for things that have the unqualified property of being produced, like organic bodies and earth, meaning creation. Since these things are not experienced as being associated with makers in the way you propose, we don't see anything like that that's similar enough for us to say, well, that was created, therefore this was created. There's nothing like creation. There's nothing. We only know pots and palaces. It's too big of a leap, says the opponent. Therefore, the general property being produced, you can't just make this general property, is tied to having an intelligent maker only when there is an additional condition. There's a condition here. What the Buddhist says, yeah, okay, we accept that products have a producer, but under certain limited conditions. And what's that? Namely, being the sort of thing that we have explained as being makers in the past. The small little things that we know, palaces, pots, plates. But now we can accept all those sorts of things have producers, but that doesn't mean you can then make this huge leap, okay? Vachaspati, here is our answer. We're jumping it. We're going to jump a bit down to Vachaspati, which you should think about carefully. Consider the following two options. There's the certain kind of being produced that you admit. So he's saying, okay, you do admit certain things that are produced have conscious agency. So he's talking to Buddhists. Right? Does the certain kind of being produced that you admit, that which you do admit, is it one of these two? A, intelligent agency in general. Is it a general thing that wherever there's a product, there's intelligence? Or B, only with that intelligence agency previously experienced or connected to it? Here's your two options, Vachaspati responds. You accept that some things that are produced have a producer. You just don't accept that creation does. Okay, here, I'm going to put this to you then. You accept that all products have a creator, or only things that you've witnessed? You've witnessed a shoe maker making a shoe. You've witnessed a pot maker making a pot, and only that, only those things that you've witnessed you'll accept. Which of the two is it? General principle, whatever's produced in all instances, general, ubiquitously has a producer, or only the things you've seen? Which one is it? If it's the first one, then that's what we say. all things that are produced have an Īśvara. If it's the first, then yours is our position, precisely what is accepted by us. That's what we say. We who maintain that things like organic bodies and the earth, that's what they're using for all creation. Instead of saying creation, they're saying organic bodies and earth, right? So you can think of everything alive or not alive. Earth meaning all matter, and organic bodies are things that grow. And why do they grow? Because they have the soul. So when they say organic bodies and the earth, they're talking about creation. Another way of thinking of it is moving and moving, or conscious and unconscious, chit, achit. Okay, but just the way it's framed in this argument, instead of saying all conscious and non-conscious entities, or living or non-living, he's just saying organic bodies, which means the soul in a body, which is organic, it's growing, or just earth, meaning all matter. So if you take the first, that all products have a producer, that's what we say. For one cannot shamelessly deny the correlation between an effect and a cause. You can't just shamelessly, he was basically saying that's not philosophical at all. It's not rational, reasonable to say that there's an effect without a cause. The universe is an effect. Shameless to say that it doesn't have a cause. Now, what about the second option? That, yeah, we accept producers, but only for those products that we witness, that we see. pot making, palace making. If this particular kind of being produced correlates your second object only with things that have already been directly experienced to have intelligent makers, if you're only accepting those things that you've experienced being produced by intelligent makers, then people who have not witnessed something's being made would not be able to know it has a maker. You wouldn't be able to, then you'd have to apply that to everything that you haven't seen, right? You go into a cloth shop, maybe you've seen the pot being made by a potter, but you haven't seen the cloth being made by a weaver. Maybe you just didn't see that. So now you can't make that inference then. Either you take the general principle, all products have a producer, or if you want to start fiddling around and say only things we've seen, then all the things you haven't seen, then you'd have to say, we deny a producer. So you buy a coat in the store, or he says a piece of cloth, only that very cloth that has been experienced as conforming to the presence or absence of an intelligent maker could be inferred to be the product of intelligent agency, and not some other one in the market. You could only say, this cloth has a maker because I saw it being made, but this other one in the stall in the market, I didn't see it being made, so it has no producer. So Vachaspati is trying to make it, it's called a reductio ad absurdum, to reduce the opponent's argument to an absurdity. So he's saying either you have to have a general principle, all products, producer, or if you're going to say only things we've seen, well, and if you haven't seen something being made like cars and trains, then you have to deny they have a producer if you're going to deny that in the case of God. So the objection, the response to that, then maybe, but then what we should say, so now the opponent's going to tweak that argument, is that things of the same kind. So cloth is kind of the same thing as pots, so little things, the same kind, are perceived to correlate positively and negatively with having an intelligent maker. Positively means wherever there's a pot, there's a maker. Wherever there's no maker, there's no pot. So positive correlation, it's called Vyatireka. What is it called? Vyatireka means negative, and positive means Anvaya Vyatireka. I think it's Anvaya Vyatireka. If X, then Y. If no Y, no X. If there's a pot, there's a maker. If there's no maker, there's no pot. So that's positive and a negative correlation, right? You can say positively that if there is a pot, there's positively a maker, or you could say negatively. If there's a negation, no maker, negation, no pot. Okay, that's positively and it correlates. You could use either one or both to make an argument. So only the things of the same kind have an intelligent maker. So even if something specific thing in question is not directly experienced as such, being of the same kind, it would be a similar case. So, okay, you saw the cloth being made, the cloth in the market, you didn't see, but it's the same kind. The opponent says, tweaking the argument, yeah, okay, well, let's extend it a bit. Fair enough. We're not just saying that that one piece of cloth that you saw being made is the only one that you posit a maker for, but anything of the same kind. Vachaspati, come now. That is not a stick by which you can drive us away. He's sarcastic. Do you think we're going to run away with that argument? That's a good argument. Things such as pots, insofar as they produced, correlate positively and negatively, just what we just said. They correlate positively and negatively with having a maker with intelligence. Something else of the same kind, namely, now he's going to go all the way to creation, namely, anything produced. He doesn't want to tinker around with little examples. He wants the big general principle, whatever is produced. And then there you have your organic bodies in the earth, and now we know that means creation itself, right? Earth, all matter, organic bodies, living entities. They'd be similar. That is how. Where'd you draw the line? Pots, yes. Cloth, no. What about palaces? Where'd you draw the line? Either have a universal principle, or you have no cause effect. Then there's no cause of an effect anymore. You can't posit any kinds of causes and effects unless you've actually seen it. If you say that only things in the class of pots correlate with an intelligent maker and being produced, then palaces and the like could not be known to have had an intelligent maker by dint of them having been produced. Well, did you see the king's palace being made then? Only pots and cloth? What about the king's palace then? You didn't see that being made. So does that not have a maker then, he says? So if you can go from a pot to a palace, why can't you keep going then to a universe? Palace is huge, big palace or big city, big complex city. You can go from understanding that a pot has a maker and a big city has, well, then keep going then. The creation is that kind of a complex product. Okay. Top of page 55. We may accept that something not directly experienced to correlate positively and negatively, and it's same argument, with having an intelligent maker can be known to have one, but only so long as things of its kind are found to correlate. Saying, okay, let's, if we say that only things of its kind have a maker, but now please tell us, if you accept that, then now please tell us, how is it that, repeating the same argument, how is it that things like palaces, they're not of the same kind as pots, same argument, that have been made or thought to have intelligent makers, whereas things such as organic bodies in the earth are not? Where do you draw the line? You can't just randomly say, this category of things, yes, but this is too big, and therefore no. Where are you going to draw the line? Pots, palaces, cities, where do you draw the line? We may assume that in both cases, there has been no direct experience of correlation. You may not see the maker of the pot, but you know there's a potter. You may not have seen the maker of a city or a palace, but you know there is one. Same, we take the same position. We just keep going. Creation has a maker. There is indeed no difference at all with respect to being of the relevant type. What's the relevant type? Being produced. That's the common denominator between a pot, little pot, big palace, bigger city. I'm adding that, big universe. They all have the same property of being produced. That's the argument. Right, jump. Objection. Maybe. The opponent doesn't like to say yes. He goes, no, all right then. Maybe. But it is not the case that being produced in general entails having an agent who has direct awareness of the material causes. Rather, being produced with material causes of the sort we are capable of knowing. The objector says, not all products, only those we're capable of knowing. Even though we didn't see the palace, but we're capable of knowing that the palace was produced. So we have to at least be capable of knowing, even if we didn't personally see it being constructed. That's the opponent's changing the argument again. And the earth and organic bodies are not these sorts of things. We're not capable of perceiving a maker. And therefore, since there is no genuine entailment, there's no genuine entailment with things that we can't know. Entailment means smoke entails fire. It demands fire as its cause. There's no other explanation. So things that we could in principle know, like palaces, all right, we can accept that as being produced. But things that we can't in principle know, we can't make that connection. The entailment that a palace entails a palace maker, pot entails, and the Sanskrit for that is vyapti. Wherever there's smoke, it's always the case that it's produced by fire. Mishra, that's wrong. First, through positive and negative correlations, it is established that there is an entailment between being produced in general, universal principles, pots, palaces, and the universe, and having a conscious agent who is knowledgeable about the material cause. He's saying, no, we're going to take this as the general principle. Then, to account for a maker's awareness of their own creation, we must further conceive of an agent whose knowledge is capable of targeting the material causes of the products in question. We first of all accept the general principle. Product is a producer. Then what kind of a maker? Pot needs a potter, knowledge of clay. Palace maker needs a bit more knowledge there, isn't it? Much more. So take a different kind of maker depending on what the product is. So the universe requires a kind of maker who knows everything from the beginning of time, and he must know every single atom in the universe. And what is omniscience other than that, my friends? It's knowing everything from all time through infinite space. That's the kind of maker, the only kind of maker that would fit the bill of this particular product, namely the universe, the way he frames it, organic bodies and earth. And although we are extending its normal scope, I'm extending the scope, right? It's not just a potter or a palace maker. we're extending the scope of the kind of maker because that's the only kind that fits the bill. So we're extending its scope. We have to, because we need that sort of a creator when it comes to the universe. We need someone who's omniscient and knows everything from the beginning to the end, and every entity in the infinite universe. And although we are extending its natural scope, it shouldn't be doubted. We shouldn't doubt it. Products have a producer. If you did, you would be abandoning the very idea of natural attainment. If you doubted it, we wouldn't have inference. There'd be no more inference. All right, let's skip a little bit. All right, no, we'll read it. Objection. And we're doing okay for time, right? Where is my time thing indicator? Keep forgetting where is there. 1 hour 12. And remember we have a bit longer because Professor Dusty, we could actually go on for another 50 minutes. How many more pages do we have? We're on page 55, and we only have to go to another 5 pages, my friends. Can we hang in there? We did 10 pages, so I think we'll do it within 2 hours. That way you'll have 2 hours and 40 minutes for the class. And if it gets tiring, just put it on, just take a break. Just hit pause and go up, have a cup of tea, come back and watch the rest. There'll be questions on this in the quiz, but the basic argument of product to producer, that's that sort of level of questions. So the objector says, maybe. He always says maybe. Okay, let's say, let's grant you that. But the inference you put forth is fallacious, it's wrong. Since it is neutralized, right, contradicted, by counter instances like the following. So now he's going to say, you put forward your argument that Earth and everything is a product and needs a producer, and the producer must be omniscient because he has to know all the atoms in order to create. So we're going to put forward a counter argument. What's that? Earth and the rest, Earth and bodies, are not brought about by an all-knowing being. Why not? Since they are objects of knowledge like a pot. So if something is an object of knowledge like a pot, let's see what the argument is. These inferences prove the opposite of what you're trying to prove. Right, what does he mean by that? Well, Vachaspati is going to try and figure out what he means by that. So he says, we respond to this as follows. Right, he's not sure. What do you mean by that? Is your reasoning meant to refute? Are you trying to say that you're refuting being produced by an all-knowing agency or just being produced by mere conscious agency? What is your argument, says Vachaspati? Do you have a problem with the fact that we are saying there's an all omniscient agency, intelligent being? Or are you saying we just need some kind of agency, which goes back to the old argument? Or do you object to being produced by a mere conscious agency with omniscience inferred as an additional step? Do you oppose the fact that right from the bat, we say there's an all-knowing agency, conscious agency, or are you saying that you oppose that we have agency, consciousness, and then we add omniscience on top of it? Slightly different position. If the former, if you deny that there's an all-knowing agency, you still accept that Earth and etc., Earth and bodies are made by a maker, although not an omniscient maker. You accept that there's a maker, but you just don't like the idea that it's omniscient. But this itself would be to abandon a core tenet of your own. If you say that, if you say, okay, we accept that the Earth, the universe has a maker, we just don't like this idea of omniscient. But if you say that, then you're accepting there's a maker. So you've abandoned your initial position that there's no Īśvara. You're accepting an Īśvara, you just don't like the idea that Īśvara is omniscient. But you've accepted an Īśvara, so you've gone a long way from your initial starting point where you didn't accept an Īśvara in the first place. So you've abandoned, the way he puts it, you've abandoned a core tenet of your own. You've given up the notion that there is no Īśvara. Now you're saying there is an Īśvara, we're just not omniscient. But then he's saying, it's not possible anyway, since being like us, if you're going to say it's not omniscient, then what kind of a being is it then? It's not like someone like us. It's not possible anyway, since beings like us, whose knowledge arises after creation, we couldn't create the Earth. We already, our knowledge is, our bodies and our knowledge, instruments of gaining knowledge are post-creation. So it couldn't be us. Or if you're trying to refute the latter being, okay, you accept there's a conscious entity, You don't like the idea that then we add very similar positions, that we add omniscience. If you're trying to refute the second option, the latter, the second option, mere conscious agency, you just don't like the idea that there's agency behind creation, your reasoning fails, since it doesn't account for the very obvious fact that things like pots, the very example, are made by conscious agents. You can't deny that there's consciousness, because all products, back to the same arguments, are made by conscious agents. Now back to the body argument. Objection. Here is another inference. The Lord does not oversee things like atoms. Same old argument. Since the Lord does not have a body like liberated self. So when a soul is liberated, it doesn't have a body, it doesn't know anything. It's absorbed in its own nature, and it's free of suffering. In Nyāya, not like Vedanta. Vedanta says it's blissful. Nyāya doesn't talk of bliss. It just said it's free of suffering. So the objector says it doesn't have a body, so it can't oversee things like atoms. It can't see the atoms, it doesn't have a body. And also, and another, the Lord's cognition does not range over all things, and it's not eternal. Why? Since it's cognition like ours. You say all products have a producer like a pot. Okay, you want to say that. Well, we say, same kind of argument, all cognition is non-eternal, because all the cognizers that we know, their cognition is not eternal. So then God's cognition is not eternal. We don't have an example. You have to give an example in inference. You say that smoke comes from fire, like in the kitchen. So you want to say products are produced by someone with cognition, but all the producers produce products with cognition, their cognition is not eternal. So, getting a bit tired here. You're wrong, says Vachaspati. For either of these inferences, no, let's skip that. Let's skip all that. Let's go down. Let's go across the page. Where's 57? Let's go to the second paragraph. The Lord's desire and effort. Now he's adding that not only is there intelligence, there has to be desire and effort, because for creation, I just know the ingredients, like the potter, but he knows the clay, but he also has a desire to make a pot, and he has to have the intention to make it. So now we're adding further characteristics to God, to Īśvara, not only omniscience, that's been the argument up to now, must have a desire to create, must have intention to create, must make the effort to create. So that verse, page 57, second paragraph, the Lord's desire and effort should also be understood as being eternal, like his knowledge. He must have eternal desire because his creation is eternal, and he must have eternal effort to be, because karma is always being connected at every second. All living beings are receiving their karma. So God's effort in making all those connections, that must also be eternal. And they are included within the they're including within the requirements for the creation of the world. So you need to add these ingredients into for Īśvara to be up to the job. Not only must he be omniscient, he must have eternal desire and eternal effort. By establishing one of them, the other two are also established. If you accept any one of those, you have the other two. If there's a desire, there must be conscious entity, and there must be the effort to fulfill the desire. If you have an effort, that must be preceded by desire and preceded by consciousness. So any one of them involves the other two. Therefore, by showing nothing more than that things like earth are produced by an agent, all we're saying is creation is produced by an agent. By saying nothing other than that, then we have to fill out what kind of an agent. By saying nothing more than that, things like earth are produced by an agent, and then filling out our understanding of what sort such an agent must be like. The Lord is shown to have this character. All we need to do is show that a product has a producer. Therefore, the universe is a product. It has a special kind of producer that's competent, right? The potter's competent to do the pot. Palace maker is competent to do the palace. He has knowledge of all the ingredients of the palace. So what kind of competent being is capable of doing creation, must be omniscient, and now he's adding other ingredients. Must have a desire, must be able to have the intention and make the effort. Do we want to read this? Let's see what happens. Or let's say, for the sake of argument, that we've established agency with respect to the items under discussion. Let's say we've accepted there's an Īśvara, there's an agent behind creation. Let's say we've only accepted only in a very general sense. There's just some kind of intelligence, very general. Yet by an argument from elimination, an inference in negative form, we can establish a specific understanding of the maker. Here's the inference. He's saying, right, let's say we accept in principle that there's a maker, but that's just very general. But now we're going to use an argument expressed negatively. You'll see what that means in a minute, to fill that picture out a little bit. What kind of a maker must be posited to be up to that kind of a job of creating the universe? Number one, the maker of things like bodies and earth, who has knowledge of the material causes. Let's take the opposite. Let's say you say that there is a maker, but he does not have non-eternal. There's a double negative. The maker of things like bodies and earth, who has knowledge of the material causes, does not have non-eternal, limited cognition. He doesn't have non-eternal, limited conditions. That means he has eternal, unlimited. If he doesn't have non-eternal, he has eternal. If he doesn't have limited, then he has unlimited. Right. Why? True. Because otherwise, if we didn't say that, there would be the unacceptable consequences. We'd end up in a fix. We'd end up in a philosophical dilemma, unacceptable consequences. What would that be? That the maker of things like bodies and earth would not have knowledge of the material causes. Then you'd have a maker who doesn't know the ingredients of what he's making. We don't see any examples of that in the world. Someone makes something, knows the ingredients. 3, for we do not find that a being with non-eternal, limited cognition could have knowledge of the material causes of earth and organic bodies, just as we humans do not. We don't have knowledge of the atoms. So, so it's not, and we can't create. So if there's we can't find a creator who doesn't have knowledge of the material ingredients, how would we be able to create? They'll be like us. We don't have knowledge of the material ingredients, so we can't create. So how can we posit an Īśvara who is not omniscient, who doesn't have knowledge of the material causes? So that wouldn't work. We'd end up with that, what does he call it? Undesirable, unacceptable consequence, or undesirable consequences. You'd end up with a maker that doesn't know what he's doing. He's just random, doesn't understand the material causes. To make something, you have to know what the ingredients are, how to put them together. You have to know all the details to make a coherent product. Otherwise, it'd just be a chaos of parts. So the maker does have knowledge of the material causes of creation, must have it to create. Therefore, the maker does not have non-eternal, limited cognition. He doesn't have non-eternal, means he has eternal, and he doesn't have limited. Anyway, it's just another way of framing the argument to show that it's contradictory is absurd, right? So you can either put the argument positively, that a creator must have knowledge of the ingredients of the creation, but then if you negate that, you end up in absurd, that a creator is creating without any knowledge of the material causes. So that's just another way of framing the same argument in a negative sense. In other words, if you don't accept, you accept as a creator, but you don't accept it's omniscient, you're going to be saying that somebody can create without knowledge of the material causes. So no agent other than the Lord, conceived as having features, only a Lord that has features. What kind of features? Unlimited, eternal knowledge could be the agent of creation. There can be no other kind of creator. Creator has to know the ingredients of the creation, every single one of them. Otherwise, how could he put them together in a coherent, the universe is coherently put together. So he must have, no other agent would fit the bill. That's what he's saying. So that agent must know everything from the beginning of time, and that's omniscience. So no, no agent other than the Īśvara conceived as having features, and not just an Īśvara, any old Īśvara, but the Īśvara who has these additional features. And what are they? Unlimited, because the universe is unlimited. Eternal, because they all say that there was no creation. It's eternal. They don't accept it, they wouldn't accept creatio ex nihilo, as Christians do, or Big Bang. They would say it's eternal. If they accepted the Big Bang, they would say there was a previous universe. They do accept sort of a Big Bang kind of, they accept cyclical creativity. You fit that into a Big Bang model, as long as you say that eventually the universe, which is expanding at some point, would reach a place of expansive saturation, and then it would collapse. And then it would explode again after a period. So any Īśvara behind all that has to know all of that. So that's unlimited. Only such a being could be the agent of creation. Why? Because creation requires direct knowledge of the individual atoms and all the immeasurable individual stores of karma made by and housed in individual self. He's got to know the atoms, and he's got to know the souls and the karma, which for Nyāya is in the soul. It's the quality of the soul. And he has to arrange all the atoms, not just for one soul, but infinite number of souls, all coexisting, all interacting, right? I'm talking to you. There's ants under my feet on the grass. There's birds in the sky. There's outmans in the tree behind me. All of that, the atoms that sort of are arranging themselves around me in the form of my body, all of that has to be coexisting in accordance with everybody else's karma. So you have to know everything to be able to put that show like that together. Only another page, my friends. We're on 58 and we get to 60. We're almost there. Vachaspati. The Lord is capable of overseeing karmic merit and demerit, right? It's karma. That's merit, it's dharma, adharma, which inhere in other selves due to a connection with them. Oh, no, we don't worry. Well, let's not worry about that. That's going to take us into how does the Lord connect? Is it conjunction? Is it inherence? And then we'd have to discuss other categories of Nyāya, which it's a bit late in the day to do that. And you may be feeling a little bit overwhelmed. What do we got up there? 1 hour and 30 minutes. So we're not using up our whole 2 hours, my friends. But it's intense stuff. So I think Professor Dusty was, I thought he was going to do an hour and a half lecture, and he ended up doing 45, which I'm very, very grateful. It was a great lecture, a lot in there. So it's definitely worth, worth it's worth a class of an hour and a half, because he's very smart and very systematic. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation. So we'll just do a few more minutes, and then that will be it. So this week there's a little bit of a shorter sessions together, a bit shorter than normal. Let's just go with it. I don't want to artificially sit here, and I think we've done enough. I think we did some good. I think we've hopefully got a good sense of Vachaspati, and let's just call that a day. But let's finish up with that. Nyāya they don't quote scripture like Vedanta. In Vedanta, everything is scripture, or certainly the first chapter, other than the second chapter of the Vedanta Sutra. The first and the third and the fourth chapter, all quotations from the Upanishads. Nyāya doesn't quote, they're using argument. Notice it's all arguments, all inference, it's all logic, reasoning from cause to effect, or rather from effect to cause, beg your pardon. But they accept scripture, they just don't prioritize it. They feel that, okay, scripture is okay if you accept the scripture. If you're a Vedantin, you can debate another Vedantin. So Advaita can debate the other schools because you're using the same epistemological source. You both agree in the knowledge, knowledge that's contained in the Upanishad. You agree as to its epistemic validity. You accept the Upanishads as truth. So then you can debate with another person who accepts that. And then it's a matter of which interpretation of those texts is better. So you make a claim, and your opponent in a debate amongst Vedantins, you can primarily, Advaita Vedanta posits a view, the world is false, the soul is non-individual, then Ramanuja can then try to refute that by quoting some other verse in the Upanishads. And then you can use the sacred texts themselves to have your debate, right? You can quote scripture, and whoever is quoting scripture more thoroughly, more accurately, and there's various methods involved there, which in Vedanta, what if the sacred texts themselves appear contradictory? Well, then you have like 6 principles, and that is beginning statements in a passage and end statements carry more weight. If there's contradiction, then look at the beginning and the end, just like a paper, right? You have your introduction and conclusion. If you get lost in the paper, you go to the introduction, it tells you what the good introduction tells you what the paper's about, and the good conclusion summarizes it. So if there's some data is not well organized or confusing or conflicting, then you look at the introduction and conclusion. So that's one of the principles of Vedanta hermeneutics. It goes back to the Mimamsa school. That 6 principles. One is, if there's a debate and a conflict and the text appears to say something here and contradicts it there, well, whatever's stated in the opening and the closing of the passage carries more weight in the event of a contradiction. Then something that's repeated all the time carries more weight than if it conflicts with some other statement, but that's just one statement, whereas it conflicts with something that's repeated a lot, then repetition carries more weight. These are obvious, simple, and we would, I think, agree with them. And then there's 6 principles like that: opening, closing statements, repetition. If something's praised and it receives a lot of praise, then that obviously means it's being valorized, and therefore that carries more weight than something that's not praised. So in this way, there are 6, and we don't need to. It would take me a few minutes to remember the other 3. But the point is, the point from our perspective is Vedanta uses reason and argument secondarily, but it's primarily scripture that it's his main source of knowledge. Then in chapter 2, remember I said chapter 1, 3, and 4 are interpretations of scripture. Chapter 2, it uses inference, but only in engaging other schools. You can't quote scripture if someone doesn't accept your scripture. If a Christian is debating a Hindu, there's no point quoting the Bible if the Hindu doesn't accept the Bible, and vice versa. If a Hindu is debating a priest using scripture, the Hindu, there's no point the Hindu quoting the Gita that says Krishna is God if the Christian doesn't accept the Gita. So you can't have a debate unless you both accept the scripture. So Nyāya then is debating the Buddhists, especially. The Buddhists don't necessarily accept, they might accept some of it, but they don't necessarily accept the Vedic scripture. So you can't quote Upanishads to a Buddhist. Buddhists will say, well, we don't accept it. Then where does the conversation go from there? So therefore, when your Nyāya then takes it upon themselves, okay, especially, and they're not only debating Buddhists, but the Buddhists are their primary opponents. They also engage other Vedic schools like Mimamsa that don't accept Īśvara. In fact, we notice Vachaspati even mentions Mimamsa as an opponent. When you're engaging those who don't accept the scripture, then you have to use reason and argument. You can't quote scripture. But they do accept the scripture. And here at the end, Vachaspati at the end does quote scripture. Notice it's at the end, it's secondary, it's not his main argument. His main argument's reason and is logic, cause and effect, producer produced. That's his main argument. But at the end, he throws in some scriptural verses because they are Vedic. And to be Vedika means you accept the Vedic texts. So consciousness, finally, at the bottom of page 59, consciousness is the prover provided by Udyotkara, a previous commentator, understood through indirect indication. In other words, through logic, we posit a conscious agent. Reasons such as being produced should be understood as implied according to context. Being produced as a producer in the context requires a certain kind of producer. Being produced pot requires a certain kind of producer, potter. Being produced, something that's produced like a palace, more powerful producer. That context is different. Universe, vastly expanded context, requires a vastly expanded producer, but the principle is the same. That's what he's saying. And then he says finally, well, sacred tradition reinforces. He's not saying it reinforces our argument. His argument is primarily reason, but it gets reinforced. Vedanta is the other way around. Vedanta, argument primarily scripture, reinforced by reason. Nyāya, other way around. Argument is primarily established through reason, and then once you've done that, establish it, and then by the way, secondarily supported by scripture. So he just throws in a few verses at the end, which we may have read perhaps, I can't remember, in the Upanishads, Brihadaranyaka. This is the imperishable Gargi, on whose order the heaven and earth remain separate. And there it is down the bottom, Brihadaranyaka 389. A few verses from the Upanishads just to sort of finish up his case. He's made his case, as far as he's concerned, he's proved his case, doesn't need scripture, but he wants to show that Buddhists might not accept it, but for the other Vedic people, for the other Vedic schools, and by the way, scripture also supports our argument. So this just adds it on the end. Another verse, the one God producing heaven and earth. That's the Rig Veda. That's the oldest, that carries the most weight. 1081.3. And then the Chandogya, he reflected to himself, God, let me who am one become many, let me propagate. So there he is, throwing in some last verses just to sort of bolster the case, not to make his case, to support his case. Big difference. And so on. He goes, and so on. He's not so interested in scripture. And also found in authoritative law, not remember the Shruti and the Smriti. The Shrutis are the Vedas and the Upanishad, and Smriti are other texts like Mahabharata. And then he quotes a few more. Let's just read them, a couple last minutes, and then we're finished. And we move on to another text. Next week, we move on, I believe, the Yoga Sutras. Here's the Mahabharata. The unknowing creature is not the Lord. Moving away from the self, impelled by the Lord, they go to happiness and distress towards heaven and hell. The Atman is not the Lord. There's an Īśvara who impels them, according to their karma, to heaven or hell. And then he goes back to the Veda. And the Veda reveals that the Lord's knowledge is eternal, right? That's one of his main arguments. You need to have an eternal agent to be able to fit the bill for a producer of a product such as creation. So now he wants to just bring in one last quote, just to focus on the eternality aspect of his argument. And here it is, and that is from the Shvetashvatara. Without feet or hands, he is swift, and he has no body. He who comprehends. Without eyes, he sees. Without ears, he hears. Exactly what he's been arguing. Īśvara doesn't need a body. Only knowledge that's produced needs a body. But knowledge that's eternal, well, it's eternal. So it's not produced. So then why do you need a body? You need instruments for something you didn't know, and now you want to know it, and you want to produce a knowledge episode, right? I've never seen this before. I look at it now. Now a new knowledge is arising. It's produced. So for that I need senses. But if knowledge is eternal, then it's always known everything at all times. So it doesn't need any instruments. That's the argument, right? Without feet. So here's a verse from the Shvetashvatara saying that God knows everything but doesn't have a body. Without feet or hands, he's swift. He who comprehends. Without eyes, he sees. Without ears, he hears. He knows what is to be known, but no one knows him. They speak of him as the Great One, the Supreme Person, Īśvara, Purushottama, and so on. He says he just wants to bring in one quote just to show the faithful, to show the Vedic traditions, that even though they're using the reason and argument, they still accept the Upanishads, and the Upanishads is on their side. They bring it in secondarily as a support, as a bolster. Okay, so these very texts show that the Lord is bodiless, and that's supports the previous arguments, and that's the end. I have elaborated only what was left out by Udyotka. Notice the humility. They're not claiming to be coming up with new knowledge. The Indian traditions are simply handing down the eternal knowledge, and each commentator is not claiming to add anything. They're just claiming to explain it according to time and place and respond to objections. In between Udyotkara and Vachaspati, the Buddhist arguments have emerged. So Udyotkara, or earlier commentators maybe weren't aware of them. I'm not sure what Udyottaka's dates are, but they're before Dignaga, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, we'll find them. They're in the introduction somewhere. So each generation has to then preserve the tradition, continue it, and respond to whatever objections have arisen since the last great commentators. So now, if these traditions are to survive in the West, my friends, they need to respond to physics, and neurology, and neuroscience, and that be people like you, my good students. If you're inspired by these teachings, and some of you have science backgrounds, maybe you're doing psychology or physics or engineering, be up to you to bring these traditions into communication with our modern moment, just like all the previous commentators did. So then Hinduism, or any religion to survive, any religion, has to engage its intellectual moment, its intellectual context. So I hope some of you might be inspired to do that, as Dusty himself was once a student, Professor Dusty at Rutgers. I remember him very well, sitting in our, maybe it was Hindu philosophy class or Gita class. Remember him sitting there, very smart, very just, very capable. It's obvious. I got to know him back then quite well. As a matter of fact, he rented a room in my house for a year. He and his wife, but he was a student. They were just getting established. So we were housemates right here in my house here. That's my house. So he rented a room upstairs. All right, so I have elaborated only what was left out by Udyottaka, the author of the Vartika. That's the name of Udyottaka's commentary on Nyāya Sutra. And this is now done. I've just said it, okay, done. I'm not claiming anything. I'm just, adding and elaborating what he's the great mind. I'm not claiming to be great. He did his commentary, and I'm just sort of bolstering it. And that's a nice, humble position to take vis-a-vis tradition, respectful of the previous theologians, humble, sitting at their feet, and then because maybe new needs arise, new intellectual currents arise since those theologians, then you see yourself. I'm just continuing that tradition. That's all. Very beautiful, my friends. Hope you were okay with all this, and I believe you will enjoy the next two texts. The Gita and the Yoga Sutras, by the way, are canonical texts in Western yoga. Okay, you go to a yoga studio, there's tens of millions of people doing yoga now, this thing called yoga, every high street. They've never heard of Nyāya, they never heard of Mimamsa, they've never heard of Sankhya, but they've all heard of the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita. So these now are not ancient Indian texts, some ancient Indian intellectual traditions. They are now part of our modern Western world, my friends. And if you do a teacher training course in yoga, you have to do 20 hours of Yoga Sutra, if it's a proper training program. This morning, right before this lecture, I gave a lecture to a yoga studio. They're doing a teacher training course. They invited me in to speak on yoga. So the Yoga Sutra philosophy and Bhagavad Gita philosophy is now not some 2,000-year-old ancient text from 2,000 miles away. It is now part of our modern Western cultural and intellectual environment, my friends. So, the next two texts, folks sitting right here, New Brunswick, Princeton, in the yoga studio are reading those same texts. So hopefully that will encourage you to take them seriously, realize their relevance, realize their importance, realizing their ongoing power to communicate, to provide meaning. And, if you've struggled a bit with some of this earlier material, please engage the Gita and Yoga Sutras as best you can, because tens of millions of Americans, no background in Hinduism, none of that. They are taking these texts very seriously. So hopefully that will be an encouragement. Have a great day, my friends, and we'll see you next week.